Hello there, and welcome to this, the 213th episode of DF Direct Weekly, which is, and shall always be, our weekly show discussing the latest gaming and technology news. And man, there's a lot to get through this week. Joining me to discuss it, first of all, Oliver Mackenzie. Hello.
Yes, Rich. It's a week filled with Switch 2 Geekerwin, some beautiful graphics courtesy of Rockstar Games, and some PC handhelds. So it's a very Oliver week, in my opinion.
Yes, which is why we had to have you on.
Yes.
And also joining us, I'm not sure if he's a hostage being held at gunpoint there, but it is Alex Battaglia.
It's a bunker with the blackout shades up. So, yeah, I'm here. I'm going to talk about Switch 2, I guess. I think that's why everyone in the audience is here, to listen to my takes.
Okay. You just need a newspaper with today's date there, Alex, to complete the effect. Which is a joke which those of you listening to the podcast would be probably a bit confused about. Anyway, with that, let's move on to our first news topic. Okay, so for literally years now, there's been conjecture about the technical makeup of the processor, the T239 processor in the Nintendo Switch 2 hybrid console. Is it 8 nanometer? Is it 4 nanometer? What's going on here? Well, I think for a while we've kind of understood that it's an 8 nanometer part owing to the sheer size of the chip. The motherboard leak was some months ago now. But it turns out that boards have actually seemingly arrived at Chinese retail for people to buy. And from there, we've actually got not one, but two very impressive, very detailed analysis of the chip. And what can I say? Kernel and Geekerwan, they did some fantastic work here in showing us what this chip actually is. I think at the end of the day, there's few surprises there, a few wrinkles in the narrative, so to speak. But Oliver, keen to hear your opinion on this.
Yeah, so basically Geekerwan is the main video here, and Geekerwan is a very special, very good Chinese YouTube channel who mostly posts in, I believe, in Mandarin. So not too much English uploading from that channel, but when they do post English upload, it's always an exciting time. They basically bought it from the equivalent of Chinese eBay for $150, the board there. And it's a T239 chip on the die, as previously rumored. It's 207 millimeters squared. They actually measured it out exactly there. So that's very much in line with prior estimates based on just simple photography and looking at different chips in the motherboard and making computations based on that. But the interesting aspect of it is they don't even think, based off of their analysis, they don't think that it is just flat out Samsung 8N, which is the process used for the Nvidia graphics architectures, or rather for Ampere, the Nvidia graphics architecture. They think it's actually possibly a hybrid of Samsung 10N nanometers and Samsung 8N. It's a process that has some pitches that are more associated with Samsung's 10 nanometer process, basically, than their 8 nanometer process. But it's important to realize that with the 8 nanometer process, that is more effectively understood as like a customized Samsung 10 nanometer process. Indeed, when I first heard of the process, that's how it was introduced to me, as an Nvidia customized version of the Samsung 10 nanometer process. So I think that's not too meaningful there, that particular difference. I'd really think much more about the pitches between the various features in the die and the overall logic density. So, at a density like 3 nanometers, you're looking at about 4 times the logic density relative to a process like 8 nanometers, or relative to a process like 10 nanometers, even, because they have almost identical density. So that's really the key thing here. And of course, they make up for it in part by making the die extremely large. Then they go over, there are various details here that are probably familiar to a lot of viewers. They go over the GPU, which has 1536 CUDA cores. No surprises there. There's memory that's rated for 8,533 megahertz from SK Hynix, 12 gigabytes of memory, which is interesting because the device ships at a lower frequency, but of course, this could just be for various sourcing reasons and needing to, bring it down for memory controller reasons. Possibly there are a lot of reasons why they could go with a notionally higher frequency and decrease the frequency. Indeed, that's what they did, I believe, with the Switch OLED and possibly the prior Switch revision, the America revision as well. I think they may have sourced in some cases some faster RAM modules, and they actually shipped that there as well. So that's a common feature. And then they ended up doing some performance simulations, and those I thought were kind of interesting here. But I would caution against a couple things with these GeekerOne tests. I think they're very good, but I would caution against a few things. First of all, they projected out performance just using Steel Nomad Lite, for instance, which is a test that either uses DX12 or Vulkan. And the simulated PS4 results don't make a lot of sense there. So they're using a 7870, which is quite an old card. I don't know if that factors into it at all, but they've decreased the clock rates in that card. And it should be outperforming in this chart the Steam Deck by a good margin, you'd presume, given that it's generally much more capable in software than a Steam Deck, right? Considerably more capable in software than a Steam Deck. But it's underperforming it, according to this benchmark, by a good 20%, 15%, which is not really what you normally expect to see. That's one concern. And then on the CPU front, one concern is that these tests that they're doing with different kinds of desktop PC parts, they aren't factoring in memory contention issues that could emerge between the CPU and GPU in actual game workloads. They're just running, Geekbench, and they're just running games in an environment where there's no contention issues. That's important to consider. On a device like the Switch 2, you are going to end up with some memory contention issues. Also keep in mind that on Switch 2, you might have certain system resources that are reserved by the system, as is common with other console platforms. And that could potentially eat into some margin of performance, because obviously in a console platform, you don't want to have background tasks eating into main system performance. On PC, you'd have that flexibility. On a console, you'd want to have some ability to, say, download games without that impacting the performance of your Cyberpunks, of your Marios, of your Mario Karts, right? So that's another factor to consider here when we are looking at these isolated tests. That won't necessarily be all the performance that exposed to the Switch 2 system. So, overall, I think this is like an interesting story. I just think at this point, we know so much about the system. We know so much about its performance, and it's pretty clear kind of in the rough ballpark where it's going to end up. But I'd always say to focus on the games more than the spec sheet and even the simulations here, because the simulations can only tell you so much, and the games are kind of actual real things that are running on real hardware. But yeah, just a few notes about the node and things like that I think are interesting here as well.
Mm-hmm. Alex?
One confirmation of the node to me makes me think that this, at least from the SoC perspective, should be pretty cheap production for Nintendo, given its age and the fact that no one's going to be otherwise producing on it. So Samsung is probably happy and was happy to have a customer. So I'd hope they have gotten a good deal with that. But then the rest of the console's price in perspective is probably coming from other sources, and the fact that Nintendo wants to historically make a good profit on their consoles, so that price is probably locked in from that perspective. I really liked this presentation a lot. I liked someone delidding the CPU and SoC, and actually looking at the size of things in relation to other architectures. I do think, though, Oliver's word of caution regarding the benchmark aspect is pretty important, because especially with that simulated PS4 results, if you take a desktop GPU with a limited amount of memory, the max on that one would have been, at least for the standard model, like the 7850, like 2 gigabytes at most. And any sort of memory, that GPU is lacking drivers since I can't even remember the last time that GPU got drivers. It's been a long time. And that GPU, if there's any sort of scenario where it's going out of VRAM budget, its performance is going to tank. And most benchmarks are not going to be made around GPUs that have 2 gigabytes of memory. So I'd actually really imagine that a PS4's GPU would be a lot higher on that list. CPU, though, is a different question, because that's the one area where I think the Switch 2 is going to be, in some aspects, better than the PS4. But once again, with some caveats, I think, due to the power limitations of the device coming in there. But yeah, really good. I love this video. I would love to talk to this gentleman and this channel. They seem to know what's up.
I've got so many notes about this. Where do we begin? Just quickly on the simulation front, and let's talk about that PS4 GPU benchmark. I've got a GPU on the PC side that's very, very close to the PS4 GPU. It's a Radeon R7 270X with 4 gigs of RAM. So it's got more compute units than the 7850. But you need to downclock it to sort of get sort of similar to PS4 GPU performance. I can tell you, in the year of our Lord 2025, if you ran like a PS4 game on it, you would get nowhere near the same level of performance as a PS4. And that's simply because, it's a deprecated part at this point. And, drivers are old. Architecture's not really been, it's developers have moved on the PC space, so the concept of game developers working to a fixed specification console is quite different to game developers working on a PC version of a game. So, that's the bottom line there. The PlayStation 4 in real world scenarios where developers are specifically developing for it is going to be delivering a lot more performance. And just take a look at something like Call of Duty Black Ops, the PS4 versions of that. They're nowhere near as good as the PS5 versions. But if you consider that you're looking at hardware that's akin to a Radeon 7850 or 7870, I'd consider that to be actually miraculous, right, to be honest. Similarly, when you look at what some of the first-party studios like Naughty Dog did with The Last of Us Part 2 running on a base PlayStation 4 at 1080p resolution, that's like astonishingly good. And it's going to be similar to Switch with Switch 2 in that developers are going to be directly addressing that hardware with a lightweight, low-level API designed specifically for that hardware. And we've already seen the fruits of that kind of approach in Switch 1. The Tegra X1 is not a good piece of technology, and yet we've had 8 years of fantastic games. So there's been a lot of people sort of getting hung up on the specs and stuff, but ultimately developers work with what they're given, and they optimize for best results in a way that you won't really see with PC simulations. Now, obviously, we've done PC simulations to give you some idea of the features and, what... you could say that initial ports would probably be quite a similar performance profile, right? Because, developers getting used to the hardware. But, that table there, it's, what can I say? Just go and take a look at some of the best of the Switch 1 games. Luigi's Mansion, what they're doing on a Tegra X1 there is just, phenomenal. Those, Doom Eternal running on a Tegra X1. This is nutty stuff. And they made it happen. Mm-hmm. That's the sort of advantage of having a fixed platform. The simulations are fun, but as Oliver said, ultimately the games do the talking, right? Mm-hmm. The other things I want to talk about. Where should we begin? On the chip, you can see when it was taped out, 2021, and it is now 2025.
My goodness!
So I'm curious about the timelines there. It's clear, I think from my perspective, they could have released the Switch 2 from a hardware perspective much earlier. Bearing in mind, you've got comparisons there of when GA107, the RTX 3050, I think that is, was taped out. It's not similar time frame. That came out the year afterwards, and yet here we are, like many years on, 4 years on, and Switch 2 is just about to come out. Why is this? I think ultimately finances. The Switch 1 was doing so incredibly well for such a long period of time. There was no need. Nintendo would have been shooting themselves in the foot to release the Switch 2 earlier. And yet that work was carrying on now. You've got physical evidence that the chip existed in 2021. And obviously, the longer they delay using it, the cheaper it likely becomes to make it. And there was just no need for a Switch successor. Now, the other thing, of course, is all of those rumors of the Switch Pro from back in the day, which I'm convinced is a confusion between the Switch OLED, which did have the OLED screen, obviously, but was just the existing unit, and the initial work on the Switch 2. Obviously, the chip existed for quite some time at this point. There were stories of developers getting Super Switch kits at one point. Maybe plans changed. Maybe just Nintendo decided there was no need. But the point is that this is now sort of older technology. It's borne out by the process node. It's borne out by the architecture. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter. Because, Tegra X1 was an underpowered part. I mean, when we revealed that it was Tegra X1 back in the day, there is the usual the usual reaction to digital foundry content when it's something that people don't want to hear, where, you know, the thing is to discredit what we're saying. It was a Tegra X1, it wasn't AMD. And similar with this, it's just, it's just the reality. That's what it is. It's an 8 nanometer part for the most part, but and it is using Ampere architecture. Let's talk about the architecture actually, because we have seen developer disclosures at this point. It in no way refers to the GPU in there as an Ada Lovelace part. Something which did come up in the GeekerWAN video was physical resemblances to Ada. But there was another video from Kernel, I think it is, where they actually compared the architecture to the T234 and the Jetson Nano Orin, Jetson Orin Nano, where it looks a lot more similar to that. Now, here's the thing, right? Prior to the release of all of this stuff, we have had leaks from across the years about what T239 actually is. And there are indeed some elements from Ada in it, backports, if you like. It seems to be the case based on those leaks, and bearing in mind that those leaks have been borne out now by developer documentation, I consider those leaks to be on the money. The media block seems to be backported from Ada, which makes sense. But also power gating features from Ada, efficiency enhancements from Ada appear to have been backported, which makes sense, right? Because you need a handheld device running at extremely low clocks on an 8 nanometer process, no less, to be as efficient as possible. So bearing in mind that leak, bearing in mind what's literally written in developer disclosures, it's an Ampere architecture GPU. It's an Ampere architecture GPU. And if you actually look at the performance differences clock for clock between Ada and Ampere, it's not really a huge amount in it. And the reason why Ampere was sort of effortlessly outclassed by Ada is because, well, the clock speeds on Ada are much, much higher, sort of 2.7 gigahertz for the most part. Ampere sort of like 1.7, 1.8, 1.9. That's a huge gulf in performance terms, in terms of sort of, clocks, not necessarily in terms of instructions per clock. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's what I've got to say about that. I just think there it is. We've got the specifications now. They are confirmed. We've got confirmation it's an 8 nanometer chip. But at the same time, we're seeing some really nice stuff from the system, just as we saw with the Tegra X1. So, I'm just going to be waiting to see what the games are actually like, which at the end of the day is what it's all about. So, Nintendo isn't doing best of the best hardware. It kind of hasn't since the GameCube days. The systems that they've produced, Wii U accepted, have been hugely successful. The games have been great. That's ultimately what it's about, right?
Yeah.
Any final thoughts there, Oliver?
Well, I'd also just say that one kind of critical factor with regards to the Switch 2's timing in the market here is that in 2020 and 2021, there was a huge spike in Switch 1 sales. If you look back to Nintendo's earnings reports, and that extended the tail of the device by quite a bit, the tail end of the device quite a bit. That, of course, was because probably primarily because people had to stay at home all day because of COVID. Right. But that probably allowed it to stick around on the market for an extra year or two relative to expectations. Obviously, when they were designing and working on the T239 with Nvidia, they would not have been factoring in the idea that their console would actually be peaking in sales in like year 4, year 5 of the system's life cycle. That's a little bit unusual. And then, of course, the delay between the tape out and the release date of the final finished device makes more sense, especially considering Nintendo usually uses somewhat deprecated, somewhat older technologies. And Tegra X1 was already, a 2-year-old chip in the market by the time Switch 1 came out. And that, for Nintendo standards, was like a pretty short gap between, the cutting edge of the technology and when Nintendo jumped into the pool there. So, yeah, ultimately, there's a lot of controversy around this kind of stuff, and to me, it just doesn't really land at all because this has been the expectation for a long time. I mean, I even remember Rich bringing up T239 back in like 2022, and this probably being the expectation then, just because it's an Ampere architecture. Why wouldn't it be on 8N or some variant thereof, right? That makes a lot of sense. You don't have to redesign it. You don't have to do anything to it. All the major IP can fit in 8N. Why wouldn't it be 8N or, again, another similar variant process? So to me, it's not a big surprise, but yeah, I mean, to people who are really kind of upset or take issue with the fact that Nintendo is using older technology here, that's just kind of their MO. And like Alex said, they are probably getting a pretty killer deal when they go to Samsung and they say, hey, those production lines for 8nm class technologies that you're about to wind down, don't do it. We'll give you a little bit of money just not to do it, not to wind down those lines, which is super expensive. And we can produce our relatively cheap chip on those processes for years to come.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course you get a die shrink a few years down the road, which is exactly what happened with Switch 1, which gives you mega battery life and likely sort of cost savings at that point as well. So, that's kind of like, it's business ultimately, and Nintendo is really good at it, and more specifically, really good at doing great games, which is what it's about at the end of the day. Any final things from you, Alex?
I'm just curious about what that porting process is, because Ampere would have not been ported to a smaller process node, right? So,
well, it's the same with Tegra X1, right?
Yeah,
I think it was on 7
16 nanometer
also, but nothing smaller.
It was on
than
7. Oh, was that
the
I was going to say prosumer, but the
data
it wasn't
center chips were 7 nanometer.
Yeah, it wasn't GeForce. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to see what it would be ported to eventually at all. Yeah.
Probably what's most cost efficient for Nintendo, which is absolutely fine, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Lots to go over still with Switch 2, obviously, when we get units. Who knows when that's actually going to happen, but we've got our pre-orders in and we're hugely excited about just getting to grips with a new system there. And an Nvidia-based console, no less, which is using modern features. I think that's the other thing, of course. It's no real problem with Ampere as such. It's got the features that are needed for a current generation console. It's got ray tracing, it's got machine learning. Anyway, let's move on. Okay, so this week, our schedules were disrupted somewhat with the release of GTA 6 trailer 2. This came out of nowhere, and obviously we were sort of all geared up just for focusing on Doom the Dark Ages, but here we are. You guys did a fantastic job, I think, with the material that was given to you. Turned around really quickly. Thanks for that, Oliver. But let's talk about something that's come up after the fact. And it's the fact that Rockstar has confirmed that the trailer is using a mixture of cutscenes and gameplay, which is, well, what can I say? The peanut gallery can say, Digital Foundry, you're wrong. You said it was all cutscenes. So let's discuss that. Because I have to say, there's a couple of shots in there where you think, yeah, possibly that could be in gameplay. I think, specifically the car shots, that probably would be gameplay, right? And obviously maybe there's some sort of custom camera work going on there. But Rockstar seems to be suggesting it's like a more balanced mix between gameplay and cinematics. So, Alex, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think what is the exact phrase? Do they say equal mix of gameplay?
Equal parts, I think.
Equal parts. Yeah, well, I would really love someone in the audience to make a supercut of exactly half the shots in the trailer that are gameplay, and then to just run it by, like a standard, group of human individuals who've played video games for the last, decade, and say, does that look like gameplay to you? Because I think this really beggars belief. The thing is, in my humble opinion, when you show a gameplay, like I was just looking up some trailers that had gameplay in it before this, because I wanted to see what other developers consider gameplay. And I looked at the Borderlands 4 trailer that was done in the State of Play in February this year. And it says they do a really nice, Sony's done this for a while now, where they actually are pretty darn specific about like what the footage is that you're seeing. They say a mix of gameplay, cinematics, and then sometimes they even use phrases like gameplay taken with like other recorded in like a cinematic fashion. They've actually gone even like more specific than even just saying like a mix of gameplay and cutscenes. But that Borderlands 4 trailer from State of Play in February this year, like you can see it's using the normal gameplay camera. It's a first-person shooter. And then it has the cutscenes too. And it's like, there's like the normal cameras that you actually expect for these two different things, like just the way we humans perceive them. But then you look at this GTA 5 trailer, and even if this is stuff that is quote unquote rendering in real time, which I believe it is, I didn't think we ever doubted any aspect of that. I don't think if you're using a custom camera setup, I really consider it gameplay anymore. Sorry, like I just really don't, because it's like not the phrase I've ever used for it in the past. I'd call it like debug camera. I'd call it cinematic camera. I'd call it something else. And it's also the whole point of a cutscene. And the thing that we really emphasized in that our discussion is that with a camera focusing on specific things, you can show them in their best light. You can do a lot more to hide aspects that aren't good. The framing of any sort of media is a big part of it. And I think describing that as gameplay for like half of the trailer, I think that's actually disingenuous. I don't doubt some of these shots are potentially from third person behind the camera gameplay shots. There's like one with Lucia's character looking at a car exploding, and she has like a gun in her hand. I can maybe see that, but then I'm curious about the 20 by 10, or what did you measure it as?
20 by 9.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that. Is Rockstar saying their game runs in a 30 FPS container in 20 by 9? Like, I just think, I'm not being pedantic, I think we wouldn't ever allow other developers to describe things like this as gameplay. And I don't think Rockstar, in spite of how good quality their games are visually, I don't think we should allow them at either. We've been pretty hard about this at DF, about criticizing developers like, well, Microsoft, who don't do this usually. They don't actually label things most recently. And we've said, like, they got to stop doing that. So I really disagree with whatever that tweet is about. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Yeah, I think, I watched it through, and Grand Theft Auto games are typically have the camera behind the character and a bit up, so to speak. That's the traditional gameplay camera view for Grand Theft Auto. So is Rockstar saying that they've actually got a completely different camera setup for Grand Theft Auto 6? Seems unlikely. I do think that there is probably 50% of the sequences here may well be taken from gameplay, but with a custom camera used to make them look more cinematic. That kind of makes sense. It has been done in the past. I guess the most famous example would be the classic Metal Gear Solid 2 trailer.
Oh, yeah, gosh, yeah.
Which looked phenomenal. And I think that was actually really cool because it was a trailer that was essentially directed. And it was, but there it was being directed to showcase gameplay systems, just with dramatic camera angles, and I think that's okay. But here, you're not seeing any sort of gameplay systems in effect, really. You're just seeing some really fantastic looking graphics and excerpts from the game. I guess the other thing, of course, with GTA is that they do pretty good transitions between cutscenes and gameplay. But I'm not sure that's the case that we're seeing there. I think the thing that, to point out is that we're not, there's no sort of, what we're not suggesting is that this is all pre-rendered cutscenes. I think that may be some of the confusion that's coming in, attempting to sort of say, right, this isn't real-time visuals from the engine. We've not said that at all. It is real-time. I think, there's enough tells in there to say that this is the game as you'll see it running on a base PlayStation 5, which in itself is an astonishing achievement. Actual gameplay, though, what gameplay mechanics are we seeing? We're just seeing sort of, quick clips from the game. Not sure I'm seeing much in the way of gameplay. I don't know. What do you think, Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, to me at least, the whole point of a cutscene is that it's like a directed sequence, right? The camera control is taken away from you, And the camera movement itself isn't often that kind of like rotational camera movement that we tend to see in 3D games with the right stick. It's like lateral camera movement. You could have camera shake, and there's a lot of shots in here with a lot of camera shake, lots of handheld kind of shots there. Also a lot of kind of dolly shots, like track shots that are very smooth and have camera movement that you could never replicate on a right stick in a game with rotational camera movement. Oftentimes cutscenes have unusual aspect ratios like 21:9 or 20:9 even, they don't have HUD elements on screen. And the framing is often like cinematic framing, like the character could be in a side profile. You don't have like a weapon in the right-hand corner of the screen for a first-person game, or like your protagonist right in the center of the frame for a third-person game. So to me, these aren't gameplay sequences. They don't look like gameplay sequences. They don't behave like gameplay sequences. They aren't framed like gameplay sequences. They just don't read as gameplay sequences. And then even on the rendering side, most of these shots have some depth of field separation to them. Now, the depth of field isn't too shallow here. It's not as shallow as we see in a lot of UE5 titles, for instance. So it's a relatively deep depth of field. There's not much of that blur. But there is some depth of field separation. So when in that shot of Lucia shooting her grenade launcher or whatever at those trucks, again, Alex said maybe that's gameplay, and I would concur. Maybe that is a, quote unquote gameplay shot, but there's depth of field separation. She's blurred out. So are we to assume that in gameplay, we're also going to have that depth of field separation omnipresent at all times in a third person camera game? Again, I don't think that's going to be the case, right? So even on the rendering side, I don't think it's a straightforward thing here for them to claim that it's a gameplay. And ultimately, I think that if you're showing off very controlled snippets of your game under ideal circumstances with the camera framing picked just so, that to me is a cutscene. And like Rich said, I don't think any of us are disputing this as real time. It has all the hallmarks of real time rendering in terms of the image quality, in terms of the performance level they're targeting. It all seems at least somewhat realistic, even though the game looks absolutely astounding. That's one thing. And then the other thing is that I saw some people suggest that Rockstar statement was designed as like a bit of, damage control or PR after our video. It was posted like 20 minutes before our video went live, but obviously well after it had been recorded and edited. And I did not see that tweet until, some hours after the video went out, of course. But that's a very flattering thought that Rockstar is responding specifically to Digital Foundry coverage. They
don't care about us. You're kidding me?
The biggest game of all time. I don't think that's the case. I think they were probably that's like their second PR beat for it, is saying it's half gameplay, or maybe they're responding to some other more prominent outlets perhaps who might be raising these questions. But
I think it's just a response to, basically, yes, the game is like this.
Yeah,
I think that's the sort of the gist of the argument they're putting there. We're not faking this. This is what it looks like, and I think that's okay.
Yeah,
it is real time. I mean, it's clear that it is real time. It is looking phenomenal. Let's quickly sort of take a couple of supporter questions on this. Plasma for life. Gentlemen, ! I have a proposition for you, ! If you could find time in your busy schedules, I think it would be a fun video idea to go through GTA 6's trailer 2 shot by shot and state your claim, gameplay or cinematic footage. Thoughts? Cheers! ! Well, what's the point of that? Maybe Rockstar should say it's half and half. But let's just wait until, was it May 26th, 2026 to see what is actually gameplay or cinematic. I think ultimately, it's promotional material for a game, and this particular game looks phenomenal. Alex's rage-faced bottom, he's back. Rockstar says GTA 6's second trailer is half gameplay, half cutscenes, but what does that actually mean? It's clearly not raw player-controlled footage. More likely it's replay-style gameplay, which often gets visual upgrades. Just look at Gran Turismo. During gameplay, not all cars have ray tracing, but in replays they do. Is that what we're seeing with GTA 6? The lines between in-engine, real-time, and gameplay are getting blurrier, and with that, so does the truth. That's quite profound.
Makes you think.
Yeah, on that final point, I think there's a clear line between in-engine and real-time / gameplay. In-engine can basically be anything. You could run the game in your engine, but with like 5 seconds to render a frame, it would look absolutely phenomenal. And it would indeed be in-engine, but it wouldn't bear any relation to the final thing. I think what we're seeing with this trailer is something that does actually represent the quality of the visuals of the final game, but gameplay, the way the game actually presents as you're playing it, Can you imagine being able to control much of what you saw in that trailer? I think, there's stuff like the car shots. You had like a first-person view of the dashboard and stuff. Conceivably, on the shots of Jason, I think it is, you could be the person sitting in the passenger seat using the right camera stick to look at Jason. Not on the external shot, though. But that external shot, though, that was great. The ray tracing in that shot was just
fantastic,
phenomenal. Yeah. And actually, just on a sort of general level, since I wasn't involved in that discussion that you had, what I really like about this is it's kind of like the game's equivalent of the Apollo moon mission, where basically you're setting out to achieve something, and it doesn't matter how many resources you need, how much money you need to spend, but you're going to do it.
Right.
And to Rockstar's credit, they've done it. And to Rockstar's further credit, they're probably going to be in profit by week 2 of release.
Yeah, it's super rare.
Even.
Super rare to get anything like that. The last kind of times it happened was like in the 90s. You'd see a couple games that had like infinite pockets, like to them, the Rockstar games. Technically, Epic could do this, and they do it to a degree with Fortnite, but they don't invest it in the things that we're talking about. Like on the channel, they're investing it in like the media blitz associated with it, live concerts. I think the only other thing that's like semi-close is like Star Citizen, where they have like infinite pockets and a huge engineering team. But it would be really cool to see these kind of weird quadruple A blockbusters occasionally. It's like once in a decade kind of experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like the idea of infinite pockets, by the way, Alex. Yeah. Possibly a pocket with infinite depth would be more useful.
Yeah, sorry, infinite pockets. You're right. Yeah. Speaking of some lore, Turok actually has infinite depth pockets. That's why he can keep all his guns. Yeah, it's actually written in the comic book. Yeah.
I'd also say, just as one final point here, that part of my own personal confusion about this, or I wouldn't say confusion, because again, I don't think these are gameplay in the way that we understand it, but part of my own thinking on this was that Trailer 1 exists, and when I was preparing for the DF special we did, I went back to Trailer 1, and I was looking at it, and I was looking at this, and I was trying to make sense of it. And it doesn't have gameplay per se, but it does have a few shots that are framed somewhat normally, with the camera at a player accessible position and without super handheld style camera motion or anything too fancy there. And the overall quality of the rendering in that trailer is not up to the same standard as Trailer 2, in my opinion. Like if you look at clothing, for instance, in Trailer 1, that's something I picked up on. It doesn't appear to move independent of the player model as much. So even there's like this guy who's ghost riding this pickup truck, right? This famous shot in Trailer 1. And he's got a bandana around his collar, right? And it's planted. It's not moving. He's going at a very fast speed. Now, if I saw that in Trailer 2, based on the cloth physics that are shown in that trailer, I'd expect some kind of movement there, right? Even if it's not like swinging all the way to the back, it's got to have some movement. It's got to have some flexibility there. And it would not look totally planted in place on his chest, right? The shadows don't look as refined. There's no obvious signs of like variable penumbra, that kind of nice shadow filtering that we see in Trailer 2. That's something that we pointed out at the time, but that's in Trailer 2, that's not in Trailer 1. And the quality of Jason and Lucia's facial rendering, especially Jason's there, has improved quite a bit. And Jason, he does look quite different. His eyes are narrower now. He doesn't have that kind of like doe-eyed, wide-eyed look. And his facial features are kind of more angular and have greater definition, sort of almost like more of a Paul Walker look, perhaps, there. They've spent some time refining his face and trying to find the right balance for their game. And so that also kind of said to me, hey, maybe in that Trailer 1, we're seeing a bit more, quote-unquote, gameplay, or what's representative of gameplay. And Trailer 2, maybe we're seeing something that's more representative of, quote-unquote, cutscene quality, cinematic quality. But maybe now my thinking, based off of this information, based off of our own direct when we discussed it, maybe the more likely thing is that GTA 6 was just being shown during a period where they're still iterating on the assets and the rendering. Like they're not done with it. They're still working away on it. They still got, over 2 years left to go at the time that trailer was released. So ultimately, I think this just makes you really hungry to see what they're doing with this game, because it looks like they're kicking up something incredible. And I really want to see the game under less controlled conditions. Like that's kind of the way that I'd synthesize all this. I want to see the game under actual gameplay camera conditions. I want to see people poking at the reflections. I want to see people trying to find like rasterized lighting flaws. I know there are a few like lighting flaws that I that you could point out in trailer 1, like they're using screen space shadows in a few places to like get away with like having shadows from multiple light sources and things like that. You know, who knows how that looks in the final game, if that's still present there. But yeah, I mean, they're just delivering such incredible attention to detail here, and it looks so amazing. And indeed, if it looks this amazing during gameplay, that's like an incredible, absolutely incredible accomplishment. But I just want to see them show off more of this game, because like ultimately with trailer 2, I feel like it left me with some more questions than answers in some respects, which is not ideal for a continued showing of an in-development title.
Right.
Yeah, the other thing, of course, is we've still got a year of development time now.
Yeah.
So, you know,
it could change again.
I think, and that's the other thing I kind of like about it. I mean, they are literally aiming to produce something as perfect as possible. And I think that's an ambition that's laudable. What can I say? They're going to take their time to do it. It's just remarkable that it's 12 years since the last Grand Theft Auto game. It'll be 13 by the time it comes out. It's just quite phenomenal. Anyway, let's move on. So this one's quite interesting. Obviously, we're waiting eagerly for the Project Kennan handheld collaboration between Asus and Xbox. And equally, we're looking forward to the Asus ROG Ally too. And this week, there were leaks that seemingly show both of them. And what can I say? It looks like an Asus ROG Ally with a kind of handle arrangement added on it. There's been a number of follow-ups to that with some interesting information. I really like the Project Kennan black handheld there that's covered in fingerprints in this link. Like a proper fingerprint magnet. Probably a pre-production unit, but who knows? And it's got that little X button on it. It does appear to be the Xbox collaboration. Oliver, what do you make of all of this?
Oh, I think on a hardware level, these look really compelling. And a lot of that reason is because of a very controversial feature in these handhelds, which is the handles. Because I quite like them, even if they look silly. I actually put handles on, or handle-like grips on all my portables, including my Nintendo Switch, including my ROG Ally, that don't already have handles or handle-like surfaces. Like the Steam Deck already has enough of handles for me, basically. But everything else I put handles on. Because realistically, you know, we're talking about these big handheld devices, 7-8-inch screens, big analog sticks. They're not pocketable devices, and you might as well just make them as comfortable as possible, in my opinion. You know, they're going in bags, they're going in suitcases, maybe at a stretch they're going in like a big coat pocket. They're not going. They're not going in a jeans
huge
pocket.
coat pocket.
You know,
These things
maybe.
are huge.
Maybe the inner pocket of one of my coats actually does fit a Switch. It does fit a Switch, but not very many of them.
One of those infinite pockets, Oliver? Is this?
Yeah.
An endless pocket. It's not like the PSP days even, or the PS Vita days even, where you could kind of fit this quote-unquote widescreen, big screen handheld at the time in like a jeans pocket maybe, right? Like that's a different era of handheld design, and certainly relative to clamshell consoles like the Nintendo DS line, which did fit in pockets quite readily and were protected in that case. These are devices that are maximizing experience at the expense of portability, and I actually think that makes a lot of sense, because nowadays you go around in the world and basically everywhere you go, whether it's a coffee shop or a bus like a Greyhound or an airplane, a medium haul flight, long haul flight, you're getting a power outlet, right? Or you have one of very many battery banks that are available that can extend the life of your unit by quite a bit. I myself have like 3 70-watt-hour battery banks that I could take with me if need be. That, so I'm never without gaming, essentially, with my Switches and my ROG Ally. And also people are using these things at home all the time. So anyways, all that is to say that I think it's a very good decision to have the handles, even if they look silly. I think it's a great decision. Now, there are obviously parts of it that are less exciting than the handles, at least to me. Windows, bit of a downer at the moment. I think you'd want to use SteamOS on this, maybe, using SteamOS 3.8, the current release, or Bazzite. But, Windows, Microsoft is obviously working on it, and I'm sure they'll improve things. I guess the question is, will they improve things by enough of a margin before these devices launch in, a few months, probably, right? Probably before October or November, whenever they launch. Will it be good enough relative to an alternative like Bazzite, presuming you can get Bazzite running on this? I don't know. That seems a little bit like a tough ask to me. The processor in these, at least the processor in the black one, which is the Xbox version, the other one has an Aerith Plus processor, that Aerith Plus processor, which is the Steam Deck APU presumably running with a higher clock rate, it looks like. But the black version has the Z2 Extreme, which is pretty good. It's like maybe 15%, 20% faster, probably, according to some benches of the same chip in laptops relative to a Z1 Extreme. That's probably in the ballpark of where it will be. I guess, you'd have some questions there, like, is that moment to moment, is that enough to induce someone to upgrade from a Steam Deck or a first generation ROG Ally or a ROG Ally X or any number of other Windows handhelds, the Lenovo Legion Go series? I'd probably consider it, not just for that upgrade, but for the upgrades in total. But I think most people probably wouldn't for a 20% upgrade in performance. Now we're talking about a scenario where this thing can probably run really a lot of current generation only titles in okay form. Not amazing form, certainly not as good as Series S, but probably decent enough form for a lot of titles. Like, I'd be comfortable running Space Marine 2 on this thing. That'd probably be a good experience, for instance, that I wouldn't consider running on a Steam Deck, for instance. So yeah, it's just some thoughts there. I'm a big fan of the handles. Everything else, positive, but let's see more,
Yeah, a couple of notes from me. Kerry Golem from the Fox thinks it's the same 120 hertz VRR screen as the original Asus ROG Ally, which was slightly disappointing perhaps, but is there anything better out there at the moment? Is there an OLED handheld 120 hertz VRR screen? I do think generally VRR probably trumps OLED if I had to choose between those two features for a handheld.
Oh, for a handheld, 100%.
Yeah. Other things that caught my eye, the memory, 8533 mega transfers per second is something which I don't think I had in the Strix Point little PC that I reviewed, which should give an idea of general GPU performance. So it could possibly go higher than what I've measured with Strix Point with that extra bandwidth. Not a huge amount, but who knows? So interested to see what it's capable of. But yes, I think that's going to be a very expensive processor that is still only producing iterative gen-on-gen upgrades. But we've had a couple of gens now. I do think it will be, you can already tell the difference very easily between a ROG Ally X and a Steam Deck, for example. So this should be like further widening the gap. Let's talk about the Aerith Plus. Aerith is the code name for the original Steam Deck's APU. 4-core Ryzen chip. It was capped to 15 watts. This goes up to 20 watts, where we should expect to see increased clock speeds, specifically on the GPU, hopefully. And of course, we're getting that same memory, the 8533 mega transfers per second RAM. So, again, we should be seeing like an iterative improvement with another iterative improvement from that bandwidth. So should be pretty good, but I don't see it being anywhere near as good as a ROG Ally. So I'm going to be interested to see where they land on that and why they're doing it. I can only assume that the processor is going to be super, super cheap. That's all I can imagine on that. Looking forward to it. I really want to get my hands on Strix Halo, though, which is the big chip, the AI Max processor with 40 compute units. That's going to be ludicrously expensive. Could potentially go in a handheld, but that's going to be a while away, I think. Alex, any ideas, thoughts on this one?
Like Oliver, I'm skeptical about the Windows experience, seeing what Microsoft does there. I've said that for a while now, so that's nothing new. I'm skeptical about, or curious, how they are going to market this exactly with the new Xbox branding for this new type of device. What exactly does it sit on store shelves, or does it also on store shelves? Like, is it only online? Like, Microsoft's pulling the Xbox out of, stores. It's reducing its presence in that area. Where does that fit into this all? I'm kind of curious about that. Like the branding, I almost feel like the Xbox button could be bigger. I don't know. When I look at the Xbox controller, it's pretty large, rounded button there. Almost like when I originally looked at this leaked screenshot, I was actually having trouble finding the Xbox branding part of it. Maybe I'm just not looking at it right. But I thought it would be more Xboxy looking, and it kind of isn't. So take that. I don't know, whatever you want to say about that. And I hope, just for Oliver's sake, that they do pack in some nice, really baggy jeans with really deep pockets, like some jorts or something. Xbox branded jorts that are sold with this that can fit it, because this is a pocket on the go machine.
Historically, if you look back at the press conference reveals of handhelds, the exec comes on stage and then they open their jacket, bring out the device. Right. What are they going to do for this? I can imagine like Mr. Asus is like maybe wearing a Neo-style Matrix trench coat.
Massive trench coat.
This thing out.
Yeah. To me, like the biggest size you can get away with for that gag is like maybe a Switch Lite. But anything bigger, and you start to really strain credulity there a little bit with your personal wardrobe choices.
Maybe a holster.
Oh my god, like an unbuttoned holster on the leg. That'd be great.
I think the other thing to point out about this Project Kennan thing, assuming it is, it obviously what we're looking at here isn't an Xbox handheld; it's an Asus handheld with an X button on it. So in terms of branding, in terms of design, this is obviously an Asus machine, right? And maybe that is indicative of Microsoft's strategy, which is, to start with this concept of, hey, anything could be an Xbox, continue that concept rather. And here's Asus making a machine that we've had a hand in. It's not an Xbox, clearly, in terms of design language and stuff like that. It's an Asus machine, but that's okay, right? Yeah. Well, let's talk about some supporter questions on this one. Jiminy the 26th asks, "Hi!" ! If the Project Kennan handheld ends up being an Xbox product launching in 2025 or 26, would that potentially help or hurt the leaked Sony handheld expected around late 27, 28? These are two different things, right? This is an OEM collaboration. This isn't a Microsoft Xbox from the Xbox team, as far as I can tell. So it's not going to have any impact at all. Microsoft is making its own handheld, I assume, which would go head-to-head with the Sony one. This one, I think, is something quite different. It's, we should expect new GPU and CPU architectures for those devices in the future, with much more of a machine learning-based focus, if the rumors are true. This one from Rave_Damos. "Dear Digital Foundry sages, on the topic of Project Kennan, the Xbox handheld, you've often spoken of Series S performance in a handheld as unnecessary on a 7-inch screen, but hear me out. If one were to wield such a mystical device, both in the realm of portability and when docked to a home display, would not the allure of Series S horsepower at 1080p docked and 720p mobile be undeniable? Surely the balance between mobility and power deserves deeper consideration. What, dear gents, am I overlooking? Thanks, humble seeker of truth! ! Do like the diction chosen there for that question. It's very, very, very impressive. I think ultimately Series S performance in a handheld is probably going to come from different things rather than miniaturizing the Series S design. That sort of level of performance will most likely be achieved via augmentations from machine learning, for example. So you'll get that sort of Series S level of overall performance, but it will be a more modern design with a more modern feature set, and ML is going to play a huge part in that. I don't think the focus is going to be on a machine that works like a Switch, in that you've got, a handheld mode and a docked mode. I'm sure you'll be able to hook it up to a TV if you want to, but, PlayStation, Microsoft, they're also looking to sell other consoles, right? Actual proper home consoles. Handhelds, a different thing there. But, well, what can I say? ROG Ally 2, again, looking forward to it. With that, let's move on. Okay, next news story. Nintendo continues to release its Creator Voices video, where essentially we get a bit more of a deep dive into some of the Switch 2 third-party games that are coming out. And this week we were blessed with a Final Fantasy VII Remake feature. And more footage of Final Fantasy VII Remake on Switch 2, which is always welcome. We can add that to the stuff that we saw at the Nintendo Direct. And Oliver, at the risk of upsetting the internet again, you've done a comparison between the footage that we saw in this creator's voice video and the PlayStation 5 version running in performance mode. I've had a look at this head-to-head. I've got to say, this Switch 2 version actually looks really, really good in terms of the visual feature set. But tell me more about your thoughts there.
Yes, so a couple days ago, Nintendo released a 3-minute video of Naoki Hamaguchi, who I believe is the game director for the Final Fantasy VII Remake series, talking about Final Fantasy VII Remake on Nintendo Switch 2, and it had about 1.5 minutes of remake footage, again, presumably taken from Switch 2, although we'll touch on that in a moment. And I was able to match about 1 minute of it or so on PS5, because a lot of it was taken from the early game there. The last time we talked about Final Fantasy VII Remake on Switch 2, some punters in the peanut gallery pointed out that maybe I should have compared the game on Switch 2 to PS5, because it is the integrated version, has the integrated lighting changes. So I thought that was, a fair point. Maybe this time I would take a look at the integrated version instead of PS4. So I did PS5 in performance mode. That seemed fairest to me because, native 4K with the quality mode seemed a bit extreme for these comparisons. So that's important to note. But of course, the Switch 2 is targeting 30 FPS here, not 60 FPS, as is the case on PlayStation 5. So if we look at the first set of shots here, the primary difference, and this will be a repeated point, is that the Switch 2 is blurrier than the PS5. There's a difference in image clarity, so it's harder to make out fine texture details. In terms of the metrics, I counted out a few shots on Switch 2, and it renders at 1080p, it looks like quite consistently, with no particular signs of upsampling, nor any particular signs of like DLSS or anything like that. I think this just looks like their regular TAA. The PS5 obviously is at 1512p with TAA, and it looks a lot sharper in these stills. But of course, one thing you have to consider here is the Switch 2 footage is coming from a YouTube rip. Unfortunately, they did not supply a high quality press asset, so maybe it fares a little bit better if we actually had those high quality assets, although I am looking mostly at very stationary shots, so it shouldn't be too bad there. Another issue is that the hair is heavily dithered in both versions, and is basically relying on the TA to clean it up and make it look presentable over time. On PS5, it looks pretty okay. And at 4K on PS5, it looks very clean, I think, actually quite clean. But on Switch, it's rougher here and not as elegant. And it looks okay, but it's a little bit more messy, more like base PS4 there. The depth of field is also shallower in these cutscene shots on Switch, which is maybe a side effect of the resolution difference. Sometimes that scales based on resolution. And as we go through the shots, that's basically the story. Differences in depth of field and in the hair rendering, quality of hair rendering, and then less clarity on Switch 2. But not altogether a bad looking result. It looks pretty good. This last shot has a bit more of a meaningful difference. The shot of the tower there, the Mako Tower, insofar as the smoke is a bit more prominent on Switch, but again, just a little quirk. I don't think it means anything. There's also a bit of pre-rendered video that they showed off here, which is not too surprising. It looks very, very similar on both platforms, so chalk that up as a big win for Switch. No, but it's 1080p 30 video, it looks like, on both platforms, so nothing exceptional there. Yeah. But there is one last shot that I do think we need to talk about that is exceptional relative to these other shots, and that's that classic opening shot of Final Fantasy VII Remake, where the camera pans from Barret to Cloud, and he jumps off the train and kind of stands up and sheaths his sword behind him. Very iconic shot, very important cool shot. Guy. Maybe the key shot of that game, right? Very cool shot. That's running at 60 FPS for some reason in this footage. So I saw a lot of people online, and even Alex initially say it looks like they got a 60 FPS mode, and this immediately piqued my curiosity. So I had to download this trailer and see what was going on. And it became pretty evident that this is not Switch 2. Because if we pause right at the end of that shot and look at Cloud's hair in the still frame, it's much cleaner on the alleged Switch 2 than PS5 in performance mode. Well, it's targeting the same 60 FPS. So that doesn't make much sense to me. I strongly suspect that's not Switch 2. In real time, it's not. It's probably PC footage, is my guess, based on how it looks. It's probably high resolution PC footage. I don't think that's Switch 2. And I don't think there is I think this game is probably just going to have a 30 FPS mode, maybe a 40 FPS mode. I don't think it's going to have a 60 FPS mode. I don't think it will, just because the graphics would be downgraded to a degree that I don't think that Square Enix would want to ship that. But overall, I think this is a really good showing. It's a last-gen game running with some upgrades on PS5, not gigantic upgrades, but some upgrades to lighting, some stylistic and changes to the volumetrics and things like that are quite nice. And it's running at 1080p 30, which is not that great relative to PS5 at 1512p 60, not that you would expect it to be, but it's pretty solid relative to PS4, which was also 1080p 30. Again, just preliminary, we have to see the whole game, of course, but like this is so far looks pretty decent. Another decent showing for Switch 2 with kind of like, in that mix with PS4, but also showing, some favorable aspects here in regards to that lighting presentation. As an aside, I did scrounge up a little bit of capture from PS4 as well. And in this shot in the bar, you can see that the Seventh Heaven blackboard is substantially lower resolution on PS4. So it does look like, at least in some areas, we are seeing some of that high resolution art from Intergrade. But to see if that carries across the entire game and all of its texture assets, all of its upgraded texture assets, we'll have to wait for the final game to see. The only caveat is that this is running with poor frame pacing. That was also the case with the earlier showing, which put through our tools. And it was also the case with Crisis Core Reunion a few years back, which was also an Unreal-based game. So they really need to use a different FPS capping method than the one that's built into Unreal, which was presumably the one they're using. Please, this really needs to be fixed. I'm going to be really upset if this isn't fixed. But now the one caveat here, of course, is that on a G-Sync panel in portable mode, this should be fine, right? Hopefully.
Should be fine.
Should be fine, hopefully. But in dock play, potentially without VRR there, not fine, right? Probably not fine. So that's the only caveat here. Performance needs to be fixed. Visuals, though, I think looks great. This is presumably all docked footage, of course. Portable mode, maybe we're getting a cut down to, 720p, 648p, something in that range. But I imagine on that screen, scaled up, it'll probably still look pretty good as well. And that would be, an experience that's probably broadly comparable to what you get on like a Steam Deck at 30 FPS. That would probably be a pretty good experience there in portable mode potentially. So yeah, I'm pretty satisfied by this overall, and I think it's a good showing for Switch 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I've got your feeds here. I've actually just synchronized them on Premiere Timeline, and I think overall it looks fantastic. If you've got the feature set by and large of the PlayStation 5 performance mode running at 1080p 30 on a resource-constrained device like the Switch 2, I think that's a major win. I also understand from that video that it looks like they're intent on bringing the whole remake trilogy to Switch 2, right, Oliver?
Yes, that's the other aspect of this. And now, this is very promising in some respects. Obviously, porting FF7 Rebirth would be harder than this game. I imagine quite a bit harder. It's using more advanced features. It has this big open world. It stresses out even PS5 hardware to a considerable degree. If you don't believe me, just look at the image quality in the pop-in. That base PS5 version. It's not so good. Yeah. It's not so good. But I'm actually more curious about what this means for the broader series, because, you got an FF7R game coming up, FF7 Reunion possibly. It's just my guess on the name, but FF7R something, right? And presumably that game is now penciled in for Switch 2. Does that mean they're going to continue with UE4, instead of switching to UE5? Because maybe you would not want to commit to a Switch 2 port of that game if you did not feel 100% confident, even, implied port to Switch 2, if you couldn't get Unreal Engine 5 running in a competitive form on Switch 2, right? Which we don't have solid visual evidence of so far in the games that we've surveyed. Perhaps you can cut it a bit, but can you cut it far enough while still looking decent? That's kind of a question. And then also the Final Fantasy VII producers were talking about, we want to get the next game out quickly, and we're interested in adopting UE5 if it helps with that effort. But you'd think, well, if you're switching engines, it would get more slow. So again, there are a few factors that maybe point you in the direction of UE4 being a more prominent possibility there relative to UE5 for that next generation effort, for that next title, which is probably coming out in the next 3 or 4 years there. But personally, I'm hoping they do adopt UE5 despite that, just because it would fix like the horrible pop-in issues that afflict Rebirth.
Right.
It would fix the poor indirect lighting. It would fix the poor shadow map quality. UE5 solves so many rendering issues that game has. It's like unbelievable, even though it's not obviously well suited for an open world title. It's like purpose built almost to fix every problem in Rebirth from a rendering perspective. If the trade-off is only that it runs at 30 FPS or 40 FPS, and that it doesn't maybe appear on Switch 2, or it appears on Switch 2 in a very degraded form, I'm personally fine with that. I kind of want the series to end on a graphical high point, to be a really special visual experience, and I don't think UE4 is going to give that to you at the moment, given what they achieved with Rebirth, because I thought Rebirth was kind of a visual disappointment. Like, there's some really great high points with the cutscenes, but oh man, that open world did not look so flattering, even relative to the prior series entries. So that's my only thought, is that maybe this has some implication for what they'll do with the third game, even though I am hoping it is UE5 to the chagrin of people who would like a more stable experience, especially on PC and 60 FPS and whatnot. But yeah, that's one other detail. But I think it is cool, they're committing to bringing this game to more players. I'm really excited to check this out. I'll be excited to check out Rebirth when that comes out, and possibly the third game in that series when it comes out on Switch too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Anything to add to that, Alex?
I'm curious about what developers are going to do about these games that run at 1080p in dock mode. If they're going to be doing 4K HUDs at all, or 1080p just rendering and then 1080p and let the console upscale it. Because I think maybe the Switch's memory actually would allow, and a lot of engines do allow for, the double, triple scale internal, where it's like rendered everything out, then do the HUD afterward. And a lot of these, honestly, a lot of Japanese games do not use diegetic HUDs. It's pretty rare to actually see that. Potentially probably because they actually have to constantly be changing the character set really easily for all the other markets the game is brought into. So I think it actually probably would benefit a game like this quite a bit to have a 4K HUD for all like the damage, etc., and then, run the game at 1080p, because otherwise I think even on a modern set, 1080p just flat upscaled wouldn't be too hot for the docked experience. So I would hope devs consider that. Maybe they will.
Okay, fair enough. With that, let's move on. Okay, so the final news topic of the week. It looks like the Nvidia RTX 5060 is going to be arriving on May 19th, but it's going to be arriving without any reviews from the press. Because it looks like, and in fact I can confirm, that the driver is not going to be available to the press until the public driver is available. Usually we get preview drivers ahead of launch. There is going to be no preview driver for the RTX 5060 to the best of my knowledge, which means that even if we can source the hardware ahead of time, I don't think there's a Founders Edition card, or I don't think Nvidia's going to be seeding it automatically in the way that they usually do. It means that, even if you can source a card from Asus, MSI, Gigabyte, etc., you're not going to have a driver to be able to test it until the unit is actually available to buy in the stores. Clearly, Nvidia doesn't want reviews on launch day, right? There's no other way to interpret this particular information, as far as I can tell. Correct me if I'm wrong, which is not great. And in fact, there was a concerted effort not to see 8 gigabyte for 5060 Ti reviews at launch either, which, again, isn't really a good look for Nvidia. Alex, curious what you think about this. I mean, obviously, the attention of the press, quite rightly so, will be, should you be putting out a 60 class product in the year of our Lord 2025 that is going to be struggling in a number of AAA games and many more to come, owing to its lack of memory? Right. And the answer is, probably it's not a good idea. But at the same time, the concept that you're basically, people won't be able to get any kind of idea of how good the card is when it's available to buy. That's not great, is it?
No, it's not good from that perspective. But I would always, no matter what, recommend any consumer to never just buy something without looking at reviews and responses about it. So,
you say that though, but it does happen. I mean, the 4060 Ti still being so popular in the Steam hardware survey when I don't think it got any good reviews whatsoever means that people do just go out and buy what they could afford, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I just don't understand it, but so it goes. And I really think Nvidia should probably heavily reconsider whatever their stance is about these GPUs and the openness of the reviews and the units being provided. You said there isn't a Founders Edition of the 5060?
I don't think so, no.
That's a shame. I really like the Founders Editions of their GPUs, and it would have been interesting to see what they do for size on that kind of thing with the Founders Edition profile.
There wasn't one for the 4060 either.
Yeah, and that also... That's like a pretty small card, actually. 3060 was even smaller, though. Yeah, I think this is just bad news all around. I really don't know why NVIDIA is doing this, because the negative press that they get and the reputation hits they get from it, I don't see how it's worth it at all at the end of the day. I mean, they're going to sell a lot probably just because, like you said, Rich, people are buying pre-made PCs without really thinking about it.
I just think people just generally buy the GPU they can afford, and they buy Nvidia because it's the dominant brand. And, you know, they've fair dues to Nvidia. They've done a fantastic job in terms of providing features, in terms of providing the Halo products each and every generation. And all of that stuff basically permeates down the stack.
Right.
But unfortunately, what that does mean is that the products that aren't very good just become auto buys.
Yeah. I'm curious to see what the response is then from AMD and all of this. They do actually have a really good chance, like with the RX 9070 and 9070 XT, to make market share inroads here by capitalizing on not selling an 8GB GPU, kind of like they did with the PCIe connector.
Well, they are. The
I know
9060 is going to be an 8 and 16 gig variant.
Cancel that mofo. Jeez.
I think they can't. I mean, there was a rumor that circulated last week that said that they're not going to be doing the 8GB model. But, you know, how do you do that when they've actually been physically made? I think it's going to happen. Maybe they'll just downplay it in the way that Nvidia downplayed the 5060 Ti 8GB.
Oh, that
but
would
yes,
suck.
yeah. I mean, I've got a few thoughts on this. I think something which, how can I put this without upsetting people? In 2020, Nvidia put out the 12GB RTX 3060, and they did it for $330, right? You paid a bit more for that 12 gigs of memory. It didn't stop the 3060 being an incredibly successful piece of kit, even though, you know, in terms of the product, the 12 gigs was the best thing about it. But, you know, I just did an inflation calculator. $330 today is $407.76. And the cost of silicon isn't getting cheaper. So I think it is the case that, you know, in order to maintain margins, we are getting these 8GB products. And if you want what is, in effect, the real 5060, it's called the 5060 Ti. I think that's basically what's happening here. It's not great because historically we're still wedded to this concept that you're going to get a much better product at a much lower price. It's clearly not happening anymore in a world where a current generation console has not dropped in price in 5 years.
In price on the Xbox side.
But it is what it is. I do think that it will likely be solved with the refresh if Nvidia decides to move to those 3GB modules per, you know, for all of the SKUs. Obviously, there's rumors it's going to happen for the 5070 Super and the 5080 Super. The question is whether it goes down to the 60 class or whether it's just not economically viable at that point. But it is a problem. There's no doubt about it. And unfortunately, the only way to get out of that problem is to spend more money, which presents affordability issues. But at the same time, inflation is what it is. Moore's law isn't what it was. And that's kind of one of the factors behind what's happening, I think. Mm-hmm. This is not to excuse the fact that the 5060 is not being ceded to, or rather the driver is not being ceded to the press, because that's really not a good look. And they will be punished for it. I think that's the bottom line. I mean, even if the 8GB situation wasn't bad enough, they're going to be punished for the concept of withholding that product so they can get it out without reviews. That's really not great. I'm going to go to this supporter question from Iftekhar Safai, and I do apologize if the pronunciation is bad there. Is there any plan to do a hardware unbox style 5060 Ti 16 gig versus 8 gig video to highlight and bring more attention to why we need to have over 8GB of VRAM across the stack? Alex, thoughts on that? I mean, here's the thing, right? When you do a really good job like Hardware Unboxed did, I mean, you've really got to dig deep to find other examples, and ultimately you're just proving the same point.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think so they did it in a good way, the left and right, and showing off what it like. Not all of the scenarios, and Steve mentioned himself in the video, like not all the scenarios are actually things that they would necessarily expect the user to do, but they were just showing them off. And I think the way you would maybe do it is to do it somehow differently is a little bit more like an optimized settings video.
Yeah.
Where you're showing like, actually this, if I'm not making an optimized settings video or someone else isn't on in the internet, an 8 gigabyte GPU means you're having to do a lot of manual work yourself, whereas the 16 gigabyte one is more plug and play. And I think that is something that would have to be communicated across to the viewer. That if you're getting an 8 gigabyte GPU now, you're setting yourself up for headaches of the future that you could avoid if the product were differently tailored. And I think that would be what the review would focus on, about how I myself find it annoying. Because I sometimes, and I'm doing it right now for Doom, by the way, Doom the Dark Ages, I'm working on my technical aspect of it. Now I have a 4060 in the machine. That game, I won't talk about the specifics of it, but when I have an 8 gigabyte GPU in the machine, what I have to do that I don't have to do for other GPUs is I have to like play much more of the game than I would ever have to do with a GPU that has more VRAM to get a sense of whether or not it breaks at some point. Because then I get a comment always like, Alex did not test far enough. And it's like, dude, how many configurations can I test? Like, oh my God, I have limited time. But yeah, so I have to play a certain amount of the game, and then I have to like go through all the settings that I would presume are VRAM intensive. So like shadows, I have to maybe pump those down. Like I had to do in Indiana Jones, where I said like there's a balance between shadows and the texture setting. You know, I have to go through all these things. I have to consider if the game has the option for it, turning off aspects of ray tracing, not using ray tracing, not turning on frame generation. And these are all things that I have to go through my mind. And I'm a professional. Yes, this is my job. I'm a professional doing this. And I actually find it challenging because I have to do so much to just get the video out. A user is going to not know those things. They're not going to have the knowledge, and they're going to be pissed off that the game runs like crap or looks like crap because they have misconfigured settings. And I think that is the aspect that I would make in a review. Steve did a wonderful job, but I think I would just show my sheer frustration as a user as part of the review.
Yeah. Well, maybe when things are a bit, less
relaxed,
challenging in terms of time, we should do something like this.
Yeah.
For sure. Oliver, do you have anything to weigh in with?
Geez. I mean, I don't think this is that promising. Because when you're launching a card, people need to know about those cards when they make a purchasing decision, just in the abstract for any card. And it doesn't send a good message about the card or its performance. Like, I mean, I'm sure they'll sell a lot of units. Obviously, the 8 gigabyte thing is a big issue in AAA with this card, but maybe there is even a positive story to tell about like this card's performance in Overwatch or Counter-Strike or Rocket League or GTA Online or any number of other games that are relatively VRAM light and are esports oriented. Maybe there is a decent story to tell. But the problem for Nvidia now, in my view, is that probably there's going to be like every video from every tech outlet saying something along the lines when they do their final GTA or when they do their final RTX 5060 review, it's going to be something like, see what Nvidia was hiding from you, or here's the poor performance
they didn't want you to see.
Yeah, here's the poor performance Nvidia like doesn't want you to see, And that's a bad marketing beat for Nvidia. I mean, imagine you're launching this new product into the world. You don't have the negative press cycle you got on day one, but on day 2 or day 3 or day 4, all of a sudden these reviews are popping out of the woodwork saying Nvidia did not want you to see this review. They withheld it. That's not a positive story either.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's not great. I don't really have too much to say about this. I will be reviewing it, and I should apologize that I don't have the 5060 Ti review out. There will be explanations for that. I was trying to do something different, and it's just taken me down a whole rabbit hole of what PC latency as a metric actually is, what input lag actually is. how PC latency versus LDAT input lag results don't kind of make sense. There's a lot going on with the 5060 Ti, but I actually quite like the 5060 Ti in terms of the 16 gigabyte model. In terms of proportionate value versus the 5070, it falls short, shall we say, but you are getting 4 gigabytes of extra memory,
which I think is nice.
It is very, very similar to the PlayStation 5 Pro GPU in many ways, except that you can do stuff like multi-frame generation. Optimized settings with multi-frame gen works on the 5060 Ti 16 gig version at least. And you get some really interesting results. It's a really, I mean, I keep saying it every time we talk about a GPU that's lower down the stack, but, the less resources you have, the more interesting it is for somebody like me to see what you can get out of the product. And I was actually quite impressed with what I got out of the 5060 Ti. It's just, there's just a lot of questions about, well, how come the 5070 is like 40% plus more performant, but only costs 24% more money? Those are sort of big questions that you can't really make any sort of justification for with the 5060 Ti, but it is what it is. 5060, I mean, the 8 gigs is going to be a problem. Oliver's right. It's not going to be a problem for many people, but ultimately people who watch Digital Foundry are people who are playing the AAA games. And in terms of not yet having done an 8 gigabyte versus 16 gigabyte video, all I can really say is watch Alex's reviews, because he does point out the problems that 8 gigabyte cards have. So it's not as if we're ignoring the issue of stuff. And I'm so sorry, Alex, that I gave you that 4060 because you don't like it, do you?
Oh, it's probably... It is probably my most hated GPU that I've actually ever had to use for DF purposes. I actually did. I mean, I also had the RX 5700. I also didn't like too much because it had problems with like HDMI detection on launch, as well as just being a blower card. So it was like super loud. But no, this is probably my least favorite GPU I've ever had to have my hands on for DF purposes, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you're also using it on a PCIe Gen 3 board with that 3600, right?
I think it is actually one of the earlier Gen 4 boards. It should be PCI 4, so it's not super gimped. Otherwise, it would actually end up being like somewhat unplayable in some games. But I think the Gen 4 saves it. And that's another thing about the 5060 series that I don't like, is the half PCIe thing, because let's be honest with you, you can't be upgrading from a PCIe 3 interface board. You need PCIe 4, at the least. And then I think there's been some benchmarking going on, specifically about PCIe 4 performance being actually somewhat poor on the 5060 Ti 8 gig version. Because a lot of games are swapping a lot more at that point, and that will definitely have an effect on frame times at that point. So
it has an impact on the 16 gig version as well, as I discovered in my as yet unpublished review. Up to 20% performance hit in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle.
In the 4 or 5 version, or Gen 3, Gen 4, Gen 5.
This is Gen 3 versus Gen 5.
Yeah, that's awful. Yeah, that's awful.
Which is, I mean, it goes from, depending on the game, it goes from like 2% to 20%. But either way, when you're buying a budget GPU, the chances are it probably will end up in a PCIe 3 board, which does present problems, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, 5060, we will review it. We'll get hold of one. Then we'll have to wait for the public release to test it, I guess. Not great. But anyway, that's it. Let's move on. Okay, let's move on to supporter Q&A then. This is the part of the show where every week I ask our supporters on Patreon to pose their questions for inclusion in the show. I choose the ones that I think are best, or rather the ones we're best equipped to answer within this particular format. Going to kick off with a dual question. This one from Gorguts. First of all, hi DF gentlemen, ! News just broke that AMD released an update to FSR 3 version 3.1.4. Do you think AMD will continue to iterate on FSR 3 despite FSR 4, or are its days limited? Tagan86 asks, what is the likelihood we'll see FSR 4 quality upscaling in GTA 6 on PlayStation 5 Pro, considering that the game is now releasing in 2026? Yeah, we're going to be getting a lot of GTA questions, just to forewarn you. But Alex, what do you think about this? Continuing to iterate on FSR3 kind of makes sense, right?
I guess it makes sense for all the devices that can't still use FSR4. But for the future, I mean, I don't know. It would be because I actually almost feel like they shouldn't do it just because I would vastly prefer if they spent the resources working on other things, because I think that it's almost like somewhat of a dead end. They iterated on the same, hand-tuned thing for 2 years and some maybe. And they realized, at some point they realized this is not the way to do things. We should be going in a different direction, hence FSR4. And I feel like just spending dev time on that isn't really worth it on a larger level. So I would actually say I would prefer if they didn't iterate on it so much more and went on to the new stuff.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Oliver, the other question.
Ooh.
FSR4 on PS5 Pro, GTA 6. I mean, based on the timetables we've heard, it's not beyond the realms of possibility, is it?
No, it's not. Personally, I would kind of throw a little bit of cold water on this, possibly, at least at launch. Because Mark Cerny was talking about sometime in 2026, I think. Not necessarily early in 2026, but just for 2026 titles, which could mean a lot of things. And Rockstar has been working on GTA 6 for a long time, full production for 7 years, 8 years by the time it launches. And presumably they're happy with the way their TA interacts with their ray traced lighting effects. So that's a big factor. And they're happy with the way the game's image quality looks relative to other extant upsampling solutions like your FSR3s, right? Off-the-shelf solutions you could be using. They're happy relative to those solutions with their current TAA and spatial upscale, it looks like. But maybe FSR4 is ready earlier, or the FSR4 inflected PSSR that Mark Cerny is promising. But I'd suspect that at launch it would probably remain the same way it's been demoed so far, which is that TAA plus spatial upscaling. The only wrinkle I could think here is if the game has PlayStation sponsorship of some kind. There's some rumor of a marketing deal possibly emerging because the trailer was captured on PS5 and because a PlayStation-like console was prominently shown in the trailer. If that materializes, then perhaps they could be putting more resources into a PS5 Pro version on day one to have that really maximize the potential of the console. But otherwise, maybe it would come later on in a patch or something, I'd suspect.
I think going back to the original question, I think there's if you use the later version of FSR3, it basically makes it much more likely that you'll be able to inject FSR4. So, continuing work on it, I guess maybe makes sense in that it's sort of a best of both worlds scenario. But yes, I agree with you, Alex, at some point it does need to just basically stop, right? Because there are other solutions available to AMD card users, principally XeSS, which a lot of people are switching to anyway for the quality advantages over FSR, even on those RDNA 2 and I was going to say RDNA 1, but no. That's not. It's not
don't run it there.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely the RDNA 2 cards. I mean, that is a viable option. And I agree there does need to be a stronger focus on FSR4. There is still rumors, of course, that there is going to be some sort of FSR4 backport to RDNA 3. Don't know if that's going to happen. Guess we just need to wait and see. Moving on to the other question about FSR4 on PS5 Pro. I'm just kind of interested in the computational cost of that port to see, how onerous it's going to be for the Pro hardware. Because PSSR seems to be quite impactful on resources as it stands. So, yeah, FSR4, is it going to be better, the same? Who knows? Yes, but let's move on. Okay, so we're going to kick off with what looks to be a bunch of GTA questions. This one from Paper Martin. Takes a while to get to the point, but we will get there. Hello, I got a pretty simple question. Current gen game engines, for all their fault, are the most able to scale across different hardware, modern hardware, than they've ever been, but graphics can only be scaled down so much before a game is not worth playing on a given platform anymore. And the way a game is designed, especially big simulated open world games, can still require decently powerful hardware to function at all. So basically, in your opinion, any chance of a Switch 2 version of GTA 6? I don't think so. Early days, of course, conjecture-wise, but it just looks as though there's a lot of prerequisites in place for GTA. For example, ray trace global illumination. I can see that possibly being done, but for the handheld mode, yeah, CPU-wise, still a bit of an unknown quantity on Switch 2. But, the simulation stuff that we're seeing in GTA 6 based just on the trailers is quite phenomenal. And if that's going to be pegged to 30 FPS on the current generation consoles, as we kind of suspect it will, then, that poses big problems for Switch 2. I think there's plenty of money Rockstar can make simply by doing Red Dead 2.
Or GTA
first
5.
of all. GTA 5. There's a lot of, they never did GTA 5 for the Switch 1, which I guess is quite kind of indicative. So, yeah, I think there's probably other options Rockstar would want to go down first. Maybe like the PC version of GTA 6 before they get to Switch 2. Oliver, is there any world in which you can see this happening? I'm struggling to conceive of it, to be honest.
Well, it's a game that appears to be built around RTGI and RT reflections. And the RT reflections, they're applying it to most glossy surfaces and a lot of semi-gloss surfaces. And there are a lot of glossy surfaces in the game. Plus, it's using like really high resolution shadows in some places. It's using, the LODs look pretty good. I don't know if they're using a continuous LOD system, but the LODs that are out into the distance look very, very good there. So I think scaling it to Series S and having it look visually convincing is going to be a big challenge. Scaling it to Switch 2. Come on, that's a lot. It's a lot to ask for a game with this level of ray trace lighting fidelity to work well on Switch 2. And I'd also worry about the CPU side of things because, they could probably figure out a way to get the graphics on there running at some kind of playable level, even if they had to cut out a lot. They could probably figure out a way to get that running because graphics aren't inherently quite scalable. But on the CPU side, with a fraction of the performance of the PS5, is that good enough? That's not pretty. It's kind of like, theoretically, maybe, like getting GTA 6 to work at 60 FPS in the consoles. That's kind of the margin of performance they need to be operating at for a 30 FPS Switch 2 port. Maybe even more ambitious than that, potentially, in terms of the divergence there. So I think that's probably pretty unlikely on the whole. And given Rockstar's track record, I think they like to port games to Switch when they have a version of the game that actually does work for Switch. Like with LA Noire in 2017, that Team Bondi game, they ported it over to Switch. Very similar to the PS3 version. Again, Red Dead Redemption 2 in, I think, 2023. Or Red Dead Redemption 2. Red Dead Redemption 1 in 2023.
Yes.
That was, again, materially quite similar to the 360 version in a lot of respects. That was ported to Switch, and that ran quite well. So this time around, I'd expect maybe GTA 5. That would be more realistic.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure you concur with that, Alex, right?
Yeah, just some other things that even doubt the GPU scaling. CPU, I think, is if it really is going to be 30 FPS like I expect it to be, I think that's a non-start in the first place. But just like GPU scaling. So in the trailer, we saw everyone's hair being like this strand hair system.
Oh, yeah.
That's probably expensive to run. It probably has a fixed cost. Oliver talked about it in that video. And then, so what do we do about this GPU system that we've made all this art for every single person in the game based upon it? Do we ship it and just doesn't scale the Switch and it runs at 18 milliseconds each frame or something like that every single time one character's on screen? Do we degrade it to the point where it doesn't look like hair anymore? Do we make entirely different hair assets just for Switch? Not everything scales as gracefully as we would love always to ultra low power platforms. And there's certain amount of things like there's no dropping of res that can save that. So I really don't think. I mean, surprise me, cool, that's really cool, but I really don't think this is their target. This is probably not their target at all.
Also, just like a lot of the sims that we see in the game, obviously a lot of the physics, a lot of those, like, you know, the beer bottles with the water sloshing around, you know, the liquid sloshing around, like all that stuff that's just everywhere in the game, that stuff, whether it's running on the CPU or the GPU, it's just not going to scale necessarily to low resolutions either. And yeah, the
they
hair,
just turned it off.
Yeah, I don't know if they would make like a totally different, I mean, maybe they have a hair card system in there for like NPCs, but they'd have to do that they have to do something for the main characters, they'd have to do something crazy there, right? So that seems like it would be an incredible amount of effort that I think, historically speaking, Rockstar has not wanted to do for their ports, right?
Mm-hmm. No. Yeah, it's not, as I said, it's not as if they haven't got a catalogue of games that are more ideally suited to the system that would make them a massive amount of money. So, yeah, I think it's a bit of a non-starter. I mean, when the PC version comes out, we can break out the RTX 2050 again.
Have see what happens. I bet it doesn't launch due to memory. I seriously.
No, yeah.
Well, I do actually have an RTX 3050 laptop GPU that is within a desktop shell and has 8 gigs of memory. That's quite fun to experiment with, but it does have like twice the memory bandwidth of the 2050. Not much I can do about that. So, but even so, you could get an idea of what GTA 6 on a ridiculously lower clocked Ampere GPU would be like. And just as a bit of fun, maybe we'll do it. But we're talking about potential simulations for a version of the game that probably won't be out for at least 2 years. So, yeah. You know, don't hold your breath. Okay, next question, and it's GTA 6 again. This one comes from Alan, the infamous Alan from the Discord. Hi, Foundrians. Now that we know what GTA 6 will be like running on base PlayStation 5, what do you think people on the PS5 Pro could expect, and how do you think it will scale down to the Xbox Series S? P.S. When can we expect a DF special on Rage and a visit to Rockstar for a deep dive into the tech used? Well, the latter's basically down to Rockstar if they fancy doing it, but, you know, they don't typically talk that much about technology, but if they want to do it, we're up for it. But I guess Alan's question, Alex, is principally about scalability, going down and going up. I think the most interesting part of this is probably Series S, because if you consider what the hardware is, you've got the CPU, you've got the storage. What you don't have is the same level of GPU power, but based on the resolutions we saw in the trailer 1 and 2, that shouldn't be a problem. You just do a lower resolution. You don't have the memory bandwidth, which could be problematic, and you don't have the same amount of memory. So there are going to be cutbacks there.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what those cutbacks end up looking like, because, I mean, a lot of this art, like, I've seen some ugly Series S stuff before. This game looks really, it's like, it's probably going to end up being the best looking console game of this generation, even years down the line. Like, really, I doubt much is going to eclipse this.
It's so crazy. It's so crazy.
Yeah, it looks way better than everything else out there that we've seen so far on a lot of levels. And that scaling down is going to be challenging. And I'm PS5 Pro, though, I think if they don't get PSSR there for launch, which would be the avenue a lot of people just take that avenue. Third-party developers just do that. They just add PSSR. I mean, it does exclusively use ray tracing on a lot of stuff. If they wanted to keep resolution more similar to PS5 base, but up aspects of ray tracing, that seems more like it could be an interesting avenue, because if the game's already pretty soft anyways and they think that the image quality is fine, maybe they'll think like, yeah, let's give a mode where the ray tracing distance extends quite a bit further for reflections, which I imagine that's one thing in the trailer that we don't have a good inkling of, that Oliver talked about, like how actually, like if you look at the side of a building that has glass on it, will like in GTA 5 on console, will the ray tracing structure disappear like 4 meters from you? Like what is it going to look like? And those are things we don't know. And I think that would be, if that is an area that is cut back on PS5, it'd be wonderful to see PS5 Pro extend that. I think that'd be very useful.
RT shadows possible?
I mean, it depends on how simplified their BVH geometry is. I think it's probably going to be heavily simplified to make it run. In some aspects, that would make direct shadows maybe not possible. For the same reason it's not possible in UV5 to run direct shadows on consoles for lumens. Okay. For nanite stuff.
Mm-hmm. Oliver, thoughts?
On the Pro, better image quality, either with PSSR or TAA. Bit of a higher res there, possibly. It could be pushing 40%, 50% more pixels just with the TA, and that could look all right. But yeah, I think RT quality and distance would be more interesting. Utilize the expanded ray tracing capabilities of the hardware. That would certainly be interesting. Again, it depends. I don't think we have a really firm idea of like where the visual weak points will be in GTA 6 at the moment, based on the trailer footage, which looks fairly impeccable. Image quality is obviously one area where you can say, okay, this isn't like perfect, but it's also not like intolerable. So maybe that's an area you could improve. Maybe it's not. Maybe it is something like you see big ray tracing flaws in actual gameplay that we aren't seeing in the cutscenes, right? It could be some of these elements where the game is actually falling back to earth. So that could be an avenue for improvement. Series S, I mean, greatly decreased rendering res to be the first thing, lower texture streaming quality, lower detail assets, lower res shadows, volumetrics, reduced quality RT big time, possibly the removal of RT reflections. That's one I think they could probably remove, but it would not look very pretty because this game is full of glossy surfaces. It's full of artificial environments. It really does appear to depend on ray traced reflections to an extent I've never seen before in a game. You look at that shot with Jason in the car and there's like 10 different things reflecting, like Alex pointed out. I don't know how that would look on Series S if you remove those features. And then of course, like some things like hair sim, like Alex pointed out, cut out the hair strand system, replace it with some crappy looking hair cards. That did not look good, by the way. Like Veilguard, again, I'll come back to Veilguard because it's the closest thing I can think of, but like Veilguard on Series S cut out the hair strand system and it did not look good. The hairstyles looked pretty
No,
bad.
It didn't.
So especially given like the cutscene, like even the cutscene animation is designed around having this flowing hair. When Lucia, when she does her little spins or she flips on the bed, her hair is like a character of its own. You're going to cut that out of the game? I don't know. That seems like it'd be rough, but maybe they would.
Hair, a character of its own. That's beautiful.
I was just thinking about Alex going back to Marvel Spider-Man when Nixis did the port of that. They actually added a medium and low setting for the hair because it was tanking the Steam Deck.
Yeah.
But it was a good optimization or a good option to have anyway. And Marvel Spider-Man is considerably sort of less challenging in other ways than Grand Theft Auto 6. But
this is just one of those interesting questions. But PS5 Pro, I do think the idea of, I don't know, I look at what they did for the PS4 Pro, where we kind of consider it crappy. I think we don't think it nearly as good as it could have been.
For RDR2.
For Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yeah.
Where I think like that checkerboarding never looked really good. And we were one of the first outlets to go like, it's kind of like not too great. And I think it would be great if they spent more time on it. But we haven't seen a game from Rockstar in so long. It's hard to know what they're like in these aspects. So maybe looking at past examples isn't even actually a good data point anymore.
The thing that sort of struck me about Red Dead 2 back in the day on the Pro is that if your console was set to 1080p, it wouldn't use the checkerboard at all. It would just output native 1080p. And for the better, in my opinion. Anyway, yes, how that game is going to scale, that's going to be quite interesting. Might give some hints, especially on the Series S version, about how lower spec PCs could possibly cope with that when the PC version appears. Okay, let's move on. Last question, this one from Spodlude. Hello, gents. I suspect many, like myself, enjoy listening to your directs over several evenings. It takes me about 3 evenings to get through as I use the directs as an engaging yet calming sleeping aid.
Cheers.
I don't say this to criticize your content or voices. They're not boring. It simply places me in a relaxed state where I feel satiated enough to slumber. I wonder how many listeners share this experience and what your thoughts on it are. Perhaps I'll be asleep when you read out this question. Well, I'm actually, I should be offended, but I'm actually quite flattered in a way. And maybe we should just, launched a new ASMR channel. Just go the whole hog. Alex, I don't even know what to ask you, but I'm going to ask you anyway for your reaction.
Well, this is very relatable. I mean, I've at various points in my life fallen asleep while watching media or listening to media. I don't do it anymore because I'm just so tired that I don't require it. But this is very relatable, and I find it, it's humbling to, it's easy to forget that when you sit here every week that like people actually listening to. I'm not just talking to a room, like an empty room. It's actually a lot of people listening to me. And so that's, thank you for writing that. That's very kind.
Okay. Oliver?
I mean, I would rather you stay awake while After Effects.
I think that's
we do put a lot of effort into the show. We do put a lot of effort into the show. But if that's how you like to listen, more power to you. But perhaps we do need a DF Direct ASMR section for our somnolent audience, our drowsy gamers. Maybe that's what we need to do. But as of yet, I'm not volunteering.
I think we could just expand out various sort of versions of the Directs, maybe a dramatic reading as well.
Yeah.
Maybe, since a lot of the content in the Direct seems to enrage people, we should just do an enragement special. There's a lot of potential routes forward here, but if it helps you get to sleep. I mean, I have trouble sleeping. That's great. What can I say? Anyway, I don't know what else to say to that. So that is indeed the final part of the show, the final question. If you enjoyed the show, please do like, subscribe, share, ring the bell for notional instant notifications, potential algorithmic boosts for us. But please do consider the DF supporter program. Basically early access to the Directs, the chance to help shape the show, early access to a bunch of other stuff, access to the team on our amazing Discord. We do actually frequent the Discord. It's quite remarkable. And of course, high quality video downloads of everything we do. But that's all from us for this week. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry. See you next week. Bye-bye.